Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Ask Me Anything. It's another part in the series. This one's focused on guided natural language queries with Yellowfin. I'm Chance Coble with Blacklight Solutions. We're a Yellowfin partner for quite some time now, based in Austin, Texas. I'm excited about today's session because this is a fairly, I think, Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Ask Me Anything. It's another part in the series. This one's focused on guided natural language queries with Yellowfin. I'm Chance Coble with Blacklight Solutions. We're a Yellowfin partner for quite some time now, based in Austin, Texas. I'm excited about today's session because this is a fairly, I think, novel innovation of Yellowfin that allows for some more extensive interrogation and data discovery. We will do some exploration of it. I'll talk about it a little bit and some of the purposes. I'm going to go through a demonstration of it just to make sure I facilitate some understanding for some of you who may not have seen it before. You're looking for ways to set it up or maybe different use cases for it. And then after that short period, I will open it up to questions, which will be the majority of the session today. You're welcome to ask about anything Yellowfin related. Of course, I expect most of the questions today to be around the topic, but naturally, if you just want to show up and ask about anything about Yellowfin, you are welcome to. Okay, let's get started. So why do we need another way to interrogate our data? Yellowfin has an advanced, fairly feature-complete and sophisticated report development environment that you can go through drag and drop, create tables of different structures. You can create crosstab reports, filters, drilling. You can add charts to them. And then it's got this free-form canvas, so you can even do pixel-perfect style reports. You can create all sorts of very highly stylized content to answer very targeted questions and then facilitate investigation within those questions. So why do we need another way to interrogate data? You know, the fact is that report development piece opens up to a large audience all sorts of abilities to create content to answer questions. But there are still people out there who have maybe a slightly lower level of data literacy. They're looking to access that data faster, or they're looking for something even more ad hoc and flexible so that they could get into that data and very quickly just ask for a summary by certain segments, look at data as it's across categories, simple distributions, things like that. And that is really something you can do much faster than getting into that kind of more advanced report editor, where you're thinking of it more in terms of how you want to structure fields in a table or in a chart. The fact is, Yellowfin has put together a system so that you can ask those questions in a way that it comes up with the content for you based on the structure of your question. And so you don't have to make those presentation choices. You get something much faster. And if you're someone who is not as focused on data and data analysis for a living, you're not maybe as data literate as some people who might be getting into those more kind of analysis functions for a business, but you really want to ask those questions, you now have a way to very quickly put together through Yellowfin's guidance an interrogation, a question that Yellowfin will then turn around and come up with content for you that answers that question. So this helps people in a much more expanded audience, which I think is key to Yellowfin's differentiators and its mission. The fact is you do have a lot of BI tools out there that see the world in a way that there are very few analysts out there who can do the hard kind of data engineering work and put together refined and curated data. And then they publish it to a very broad audience. Yellowfin has always had a little bit of a different philosophy in that it wants to expand the world of content creators. When you put Yellowfin in an organization, the idea is not just to create a few analysts that publish to a very large audience. It's to enable everybody in that content development exercise. And this goes hand in hand with that philosophy and that differentiator for the product. So when you want to put Yellowfin in an organization now with this tool, you're not only expanding the audience beyond these analysts, but you're expanding it to anybody who has a question who can simply work with this kind of guided format and analysis to put a question together and get it answered. Another big piece of this is if you are embedding Yellowfin into your product, one of the warnings as a consultant I always have to bring up is that if you're thinking about putting content development in front of your customers, you really need to go down that path cautiously, because the amount of support you can open up to yourself, it could be a tidal wave of people asking questions about not only how is this data structured, what does this field mean, what does that field mean, how do I get this data together, how do I get it into this kind of table, how do I get it into that kind of chart, but also people will mix and match fields of different granularity in such a way that when you expose too much to them, they wind up putting together reports that don't make any sense. And if you saw my prior session on embedding Yellowfin and some of the things you can do about that with that and some of the extensive functionality you have there, I spent a lot of time talking about how cautious you need to be if you're going to be opening up that report development capability to your customers. It is something that almost always extends your support requests, and it's something that can create a lot of confusion amongst your customers if it isn't done right. If you can expose them to something very simple that just allows them to quickly get questions answered and lets Yellowfin kind of guide them in that content development rather than putting the whole world of content development features in front of them, that could really reduce that support. And it could also create something that is, for them, a very simple, fast, and flexible way to get questions answered and do data discovery. Another one is, one of the founders of Blacklight actually came to me in 2014 or 2015. He was involved with a different company, and he was answering a lot of questions in a board meeting. And the way that he would do this is he actually had Yellowfin deployed at the organization, and he would set up his dashboard so that he could answer a lot of questions. And then invariably, somebody would ask a question that a dashboard just wasn't designed to answer. And he would have to go put that to get data together, kind of ad hoc, on the fly, just very quickly. How many, what have we done in sales of this widget in Wisconsin last year? Something like that, if you haven't already put together the content for it, you can't get it together fast enough to really answer a question in a fast-moving meeting. You need an answer to that question right away. This is one of the few times, one of the only times really, I've seen that use case met with some kind of Q&A data discovery type of engine. It's not search, it's not just being able to look for records, but it's actually being able to aggregate and look at even distributions of that data, or even do calculations and beyond, so that you can look at variance, you can look at differences, you can look at distributions, and you can look at these different elements of your data that could answer some fairly sophisticated questions, but doing it without developing the content and really just structuring the question. Okay. So what do we mean by guided? When we talk about natural language queries, one of the things that I think can be confusing about this concept of natural language is that the world is full of chatbots today, and this is not that. This is not you sitting down and looking at a blank screen and trying to figure out how to structure a how does this happen, how does that happen type of question in actual natural free typed language. That's not actually what we're after, and I think that would be antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish, or what Yellowfin is trying to accomplish with this feature. What we're really trying to do is say, if we can put in front of you a category of questions, a set of question types that you could really get into, and then you can parameterize those question types with your data and a structure around how you're trying to look at that answer, then that's just enough information for Yellowfin to go figure out exactly how to put that data together and give it back to you. Very simple. And the idea is it's guided in that at every step of the way, Yellowfin, as you're going to see in a moment, is going to prompt you for, of your next step in this question, which of these options would you like to select? That keeps you from sitting there looking at a blank screen thinking, how do I code this question in a way that Yellowfin would understand? That would be, I think, even more difficult in some scenarios than trying to go and just develop the report. What you're doing here is as soon as you go into that box to ask a question, Yellowfin says, hey, here are several ways you could start with a question. You could start with a filter, or you could start with one of these 7 question types. We're going to go through an example of each one of these in a moment when I do the demonstration. So again, this is not search. This is a real interrogation of your data that will show you things like summaries, counts, distributions, differences, variances, comparisons. And again, we're going to go through all this in a second in my demonstration. All right, so on that point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll look at a Yellowfin install I have locally. So it'll take a few seconds to come up. Okay, there we are. I think everybody is seeing a Yellowfin dashboard now. So the first thing with guided natural language queries that we want to see is that we're all set up to use it. And so the first piece of being set up to use it, if you're a Yellowfin administrator, is that your user, when you go into the roles for the role definition for the users that you want to be able to use it, that you are able to see that they are either a guided NLQ user, which means that they are able to access this feature, or that they're a guided NLQ manager, which means that they can set up the feature in the way that we're about to right now. And this, of course, always assumes that your license allows for it. So you might want to check in the event that you're being denied the feature in some way. Just make sure your license has it, and that the role for the user you're trying to access is able to see it as well. Now let's go into the view. Now I'm going to go ahead and just generally actually edit this view. And we'll always clone our views so that other people that are using data from that view can not be disrupted. And then we go to the prepare step. Now we're in demo data here. We're in the ski team demo data that comes with every Yellowfin install. I'm kind of doing that on purpose because I want you to be able to go back to your own installs and be able to play with the things that I'm going to show you today. When you have a set of fields in this tool that are already named and they're already formatted and all that, you can go up to the little robot face, which gives you settings for both assisted insights and guided NLQ. Now, first and foremost, you need to make sure guided NLQ is enabled. So it has to be turned on. When you look at the primary date field, this is the default field that's going to be used for any kind of time series based questions that you're doing. And then when you see the default date period for NLQ, you can set it to be more recent time periods. There are a few best practices that I'm going to point out as I'm going through this, and one of which is if you have a very large data set, you might want to look at more recent data, or say limit this to the last year so that when people are putting these questions in, they avoid those long kind of scanning queries that would be required in order to go and pull data. And then there's also an opportunity for some help text here, which will show up when the user selects a data set. Okay, so now we're actually in key variables that we want to look at when we're in guided NLQ, most of which, we select here to include in guided NLQ only in the event that we actually want to have it available for those users to query. Now, this is a word of caution, again, just along those best practices. If you've got a very large data set, and especially one where you're including fields that might need to be cached as filter values, then it's a good idea to make sure you're only selecting those fields that would actually be included, that would actually need to be included in a question. By limiting this, you're simplifying the number of questions that can be asked. You're simplifying the number of fields that can be included in a question. You're making it easier for the user because you're only focused on fields that might actually be relevant to the question you're asking. But then you're also making it faster. Okay, and over here, we have these the type of aggregate selection. This is actually going to be your system-wide aggregate selection. So it's coming directly from your default aggregate selection for that metric. Your name, again, system-wide, coming directly from that. But sometimes, users might think of something in a different way, or they might kind of call it something different, like it might actually be athlete age or something like that. And so you can go plug that in as a synonym right here and hit the plus button, and that will allow them to when they refer to that in the guided NLQ interface we're about to see in a minute, that'll allow them to change what it is that they're using to refer to that field. So just for clarity, you can add that. Again, enabling it for everybody, adding a description, whether or not higher is good or not. This is related to assisted insights. And then for formatting, you can set that format up, and that format is specific to guided NLQ. And so then when you set a chart color, again, that goes system-wide, and then you have whether or not it's restricted in some way. If you see a red X in here, then that red X indicates there are some restrictions on that field and how it can be used. The definitions of each of these are available on the wiki, but definitely something to be used with a little bit of taste on whether or not, for example, that field could be used in calculations or should be used in filtering. Filtering specifically because Yellowfin does cache those values. And again, for large data sets, it will go in the background and cache, potentially a very large set of possible filter values. You'll see that in an example in a second when I show you the actual interface. Dimensions, very similar set, and allows you to set also the plurals, also allows you to do field restrictions, set whether or not it's mandatory, and then for the filter value case, you can actually set whether or not it's sent back to the database as purely upper or purely lower in the event that you need to adjust that for your underlying data. Another piece for dimensions is the plurality. If you want to set something up so that when it comes back in charts, it's properly named when it's plural, you can put that here, and that allows Yellowfin to go look up the plural version of that name so that it just makes more sense when it comes across in a chart. Again, with very large data sets, you'll want to be tasteful about restricting things like whether or not it loads, filter values for the underlying data set, because Yellowfin will cache that in the background. And for large filter values, that could be performance impacting. So finally, well, not finally, second to last, with dates, the only other piece with this is that if you're using a date formatter, then you're allowed to say the granularity, essentially, of the values. So if you're using a custom time formatter or custom date formatter, the granularity that is actually output into charts will be an important thing to select. If you're looking for months, make sure it's selected to month so that the month granularity, if things are being summarized or anything like that, rolled up, and that month granularity is what's used. And then finally, any filters that are created, including group filters or calculated filters, can be used as focus areas. I'm going to show you in a moment. So this is really an interesting feature for simplifying the kinds of questions that people ask, because it might very well be that you are publishing this across a set of regions and people have access to different regions, but they're mostly concerned with their own, for example. So I really want to do a focus area in Asia Pac, or I really want to do a focus area in South America. If you want to have something like that where it's a focus area in a specific segment of data, which is a definition of a filter, in this case, they have some properties of athletes that they've used as focused areas, but you can put these filters in that you've already created in your view. You can add them in, include them in guided NLQ, and then you get a drop down that allows you to select that filter essentially as a way to focus the data set on a specific segment of your data. So that's very powerful for not having to include those filters in every question you want to ask. I just want to focus on this area and I want to ask a question about it. And when I say area here, I don't necessarily mean just geographical areas. I mean any way you want to filter your data. Let's see if I make sure, I think the only other best practice I want to talk about is make sure when you set this up that you're setting it up to the data literacy of your audience. So if you have an audience that is a bunch of data engineers, boy, you can really throw the world at them in terms of guided NLQ and what it can do. If you have an audience that are maybe much less, call them online or even not really digitally savvy users, maybe just give them a very small set of fields to start out with. It would be very common questions they would ask, and then expand it only as you see it being used properly. I think also the only other thing I want to mention that I'll bring up again when we're in the demonstration piece is that we want to make sure that any fields in here that are going to be commonly used in calculations, speaking of that data literacy, sometimes it's good to go ahead and make the calculated field in your view and then add it into this just the same as you would add in any other calculated fields in a report, add it into this so that those calculations can be called on directly rather than having them try to do those calculations through the natural language query interface. It's just simpler. Okay, so we'll publish this, come back to our main screen here. Now we're actually going to go in and take a look at those different types of questions. Now, when we first go to ask a question, it's going to ask us what data set we want to include. And then you'll notice up here, if we take a look at it, that help text that we set up in the view is available right there. And if we wanted one of our focus areas, one of our predefined filters, we can start with none, or we can select one of those. And that's where this is really simplified because we don't have to go in and put those focus areas into filters in our question. We just select one, and then we can ask questions about that focus area. When you first click on this, that's where you really get the selection that Yellowfin provides you, prompts you for, so that you know what it is that you could start with. You could start with a filter, or you can start with a question type. And so we'll say show, and then I'm going to select a field that's coming directly from the view we just looked at, profit margin by, and let's just say company name. And then I can ask the question. And Yellowfin comes back and gives me all the different company names sorted by profit margin that I'm really looking at. A couple of key features as soon as you ask a question like that is that I can look at this in tabular form too. So I can actually see the numbers directly if I don't want to see the chart, I want to see the table. Also, this is a Yellowfin report. Yellowfin actually developed a report and it's available to publish. And if we want to, we can go in and add that to a dashboard, a story, or a presentation. So if we wanted to put this directly into a dashboard, we really want to publish this to our audience, we can go do that right there through the Add To button. And if we want to go in and say, I love this report, I really want to tweak it a little bit and then maybe add some filters and add this into some content, a dashboard or a presentation that I'm putting together, then I can click this button to open it up, assuming I have access to the report editor, and boom, here's the report in the editor, and I can go start adding filters, I can add drill, I can do whatever I want with it in the advanced report editor, and I'm not starting with zero. I'm starting with basically the report I want, and I'm just adding a little bit to it now. I shouldn't have closed out of that. There we go. Excuse me. Now, if I want to take a look at what list does for us, let's say I want to list maybe camp regions, and I'm going to look at that by profit margin. Now I'm going to list each of these, and I'm going to show it alongside with profit margin. And let's just say I'm going to do this for last quarter. And I think this is where that board meeting use case really comes in. If you start looking at things like this, where you're saying like, hey, last quarter, what was the best camp region and how did it compare to the others? And I want to see something like that. Then I can look at North America, clearly outperformed, but you see up here how each one stacked against it, that they were, for each of their summation on total profit margin, each of them was there. Also, I should have mentioned, note that the aggregate here in this question it's adjustable, but there's a default. The default is what we selected on the far left of that menu when we were looking in the view. So we don't have to set that because it's already set for us, but we can change it if we need to. All right. If we want to take a look at, maybe we'll do some counts, and then what do we have? Like camp name by camp region, maybe? We can show all the fields here. We've got the fields organized by different folders as we want to look at them here. And then maybe we look at that by camp region. For, let's just say, last year. There we go. So again, now we're doing a count of total camp names for a specific time period. I think you get the idea. Now, if we want to go a different direction entirely, we can do things in terms of top and bottom. So if we want to say top, for example, and we always are requested to, put in a number of how many in that top we want to put together. Top 10, we'll say, by value rather than by percentage. We'll say camp names. Note each time I'm really just selecting what it is that I want. I haven't done any typing so far in this demonstration. So I'm really just selecting basically down the tree of what it's showing me. And here, so if I want to see the top 10 camp names by profit margin, and I did it for all time, I could have done it for last year or any period, then this is it. Couple more, and then I'll turn it over to questions. So if we want to do something in more of a crosstab fashion very quickly, if we want to see, say, demographics, we want to see those maybe by, let's say, camp region, and we'll call it an invoiced amount for last year. So the purpose of this is if you're trying to see something basically, which is, your typical kind of crosstab structure, so this gives you a lot of flexibility in the kind of answer you're going to get back. We're seeing it by camp region here, or total invoiced amount by each of the demographics that did that. So again, we're getting this kind of traditional kind of crosstab report, but we're able to tell Yellowfin, I need to see this in a crosstab, and here are the ways I want to set that up in my question. A little more sophisticated, kind of building on what we did before. And again, we're not really putting a ton of filters in this, but just as a kind of reminder, we can put as many as we want in here. And if I do something like that, where it's caching those filter values, it would just prompt you for which filter values you want to include. Very simple. And finally, we can do comparisons and differences and look at variance. To do something like that, we would just say compare, and then we pick our metric. Profit margin, let's say between, this year and last year. Very, very simple. Now, of course, we start out with the main one we're wanting to compare against, and then put as the second value the one that we want to compare to. And again, we could put as many filters in here as we want. We could limit this to regions. We could limit this to athlete age, anything like that. And mapping this to your specific business case is really just a matter of saying, as you put that view together, you're going to want to make sure and have your main topics that somebody's going to want to ask questions around, along with anything that you want them to be able to filter by, and no more. Don't make it any more complicated than that. Once you put something like that together, it's showing us, wow, our revenue, our profit margin rather, grew by 1,500% this year. That's nice. I wish I could do that. So you see, basically, it's giving you this chart. Again, it's a full Yellowfin report that we can look at in a tabular style. We can open it up and edit it. And we're starting right here, I think, with a pretty strong report that answers a specific question. And then we can turn that into content that we could publish to other people. But you can see, hopefully, after this set of examples, how not only is this a very quick way, you're sitting in a meeting, that question comes up, what were our sales in Wisconsin last year versus, year to date or year to prior year, whatever. You can very quickly put that together and get an answer to that question, in addition to being able to put something in front of customers if you want to embed this in your product so that your customers are now enabled without doing deep report development or something that's going to trigger a lot of support. They're now enabled to go and ask ask questions and interrogate their data, do data discovery, that kind of thing. So as a final point I'll make, if we go back to our dashboards, this does support an API. It's a JavaScript API, just like with embedding reports. And so here what I've done is actually embed natural language queries into Yellowfin. That's a little weird. You would never really embed something like that into Yellowfin, but it serves as a simple example to illustrate not only Yellowfin's code behind model, but also the fact that this simple JavaScript API is really straightforward to use. I just have a text box here, and when I switch over to code mode, for those of you that are more kind of developers, then you can see here, I just have a very simple and straightforward div called myNLQ container. And then when I go to the JavaScript tab, all I've done in here is say in the JavaScript API, I've called load NLQ, and then I add this container that I'm writing to. It's a very jQuery style API. And for those of you that are familiar with JavaScript development, you would see this is, I think, pretty simple. So once you go back to the actual dashboard, you can tell the API to skip this welcome screen, select a data set. You can put all sorts of options in here as well. And then you have the fully featured NLQ interface right here. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I talked for a long time there, so I'm going to open it up to questions right away. Hopefully, I threw a lot at you. Hopefully all that made sense. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to you now. Just go ahead and ask your questions. I already have a few coming in, so I'm going to get started answering them as they have come. Let's see. Who do we see as the main user of natural language queries? Skilled data analysts or end users throughout a business? I have to say that for skilled data analysts, I think they're going to be pretty comfortable with the more advanced report development features. Skilled data analysts are also going to often want to manipulate the data under the hood. They're going to do all sorts of complex things to really get a very precise answer to potentially a very complex question, and might even set up automation so that that question is being answered in a recurring way. It's a very different use case than what we're looking at here. I see this more as end users. I see this as an executive function. I see this as something very powerful for example, my colleague who was, regularly reporting in board meetings. There's no patience. Those things move very fast, and you kind of have to have a lot of information at your fingertips. And so everybody shows up with, prior to having a tool like Yellowfin, everybody shows up with spreadsheets and notes and all this stuff so that they're ready to answer any question that comes at them. But I think this tool is really powerful for that specific kind of use case. At that time, the person who was talking to me to ask a question about that was asking something about, could we have it be, could we create an Alexa skill to go, query the data or whatever? And I think that is a lot of technical complexity to be able to just kind of do a voice command. I think this is much better because it's guided. It tells you what the options are rather than having you sit there and stare at a blank screen and have to code it out. And for that reason, I think it's a very powerful interrogation tool for people who don't have as much data literacy as you'd expect out of a data analyst. What happens if you have two or more fields with the same name, but they come from different folders? Say, for example, a field name created date that references when the athlete record was created, and another created date when the camp record was created. When I go to create an NLQ report, I'll be able to see where these two fields come from, as in their content folder, or will the NLQ setup just show me these fields with no distinction? That's a great question. Let's go ahead and go back into the NLQ. I should have probably just left my screen sharing. I'm going to pop it up again here. Take just a couple of seconds, and we'll go into that ask a question interface. There we go. Pick the ski team data. So there's no question that when you get that summary of most commonly used fields, that it could be a duplicate here. But when you hit show more, you do actually get the folders. And for that reason, it kind of disambiguates. However, I also have to say that this is an area where if you were to start typing, you would get some, limitation on what these are. And if you had a synonym defined in the aliasing interface I showed you before when you're creating this stuff in the view, you could also make it have a different name available. It would still be available by the same name, but it would also be available by a different name if it was, say, a created date for an invoice versus a created date for, say, an athlete account. I'm just making that up, but say an athlete account or something like that. Then you could say, athlete account creation is a synonym, and that way if somebody were to type something like that in, they would start to get a feel that that's a field that's available to them. So NLQ does follow the same security principles within Yellowfin. So if someone's not allowed to access a view, they won't be able to access it through NLQ. Someone's asking about which people groups have access to which views and columns within views. Column-wise, once a view is published, if someone has access to that view, that they'll have access to that, but you can segment, a series of views for different audiences if you want to go that route by copying the view and then limiting that copy of the view, limiting the columns that are available, and then limiting, what audience can see that. So you could do that. Same as, when they create a report off that view, same as when they create, other content off that view. It will be limited by their security limitations. So that's not actually even set up in NLQ. However, you can also turn on and off whether or not a column is included in NLQ, but I wouldn't recommend that as a security constraint, because then if they go to create a report, if they have the authority to create reports, then if they have the authority to create reports, they'll still have access to those columns. So you can turn it on and off to make it simpler in that NLQ interface. But if you're really looking for a security constraint, I would publish a view in which they do not have access to a column that you don't want them to have access to. In terms of people or groups actually having access to the view, NLQ will follow the same security, like I said, that Yellowfin sets up. Let's see, question about ChatGPT or GPT in general for NLQ against any BI tool. Very interesting question. Never done it myself. I recently had an interaction with ChatGPT. I'm always trying to trick that thing, and it has been really impressive. I would not say this is that or anything close to it. In fact, what this is trying to do is create a very limited and predictable method for answering questions. That is a very different approach than what ChatGPT is after, which for those of you who may have not just kept up with the news on it, it's essentially a chat bot that has been in the news a lot for its sophistication and capability to essentially write what really looks like human authored text. And so recently I asked it about the planet Jupiter, and if it could summarize, Jupiter for me. And then, and then I said, what about Jupiter, the god? And it turned around and gave me, a summary of Jupiter, the god. And so I thought that was very interesting, because most, chatbots can't disambiguate in that way. And so interesting stuff, not really what I would say for, querying data in a way that I think most people in their use case are looking for things like show me sales in Wisconsin by demographic or something like that. I think that's probably overkill, for the kind of questions that people would be asking in this context. Still very interesting application. Just as an aside, by the way, if you're looking to get into some more sophisticated applications with Yellowfin, we are looking at doing a data science integration with Yellowfin, Ask Me Anything, in the future. So stay tuned for that. How can I start using NLQ in an AWS environment? So we do a lot of Yellowfin hosting for Yellowfin customers and users. And so once you have it set up and it's installed and available as an application to use, NLQ is available as part of your install, provided that you have a license for it. So once you have Yellowfin set up in the cloud on AWS or any other cloud provider, NLQ would be available to you and would be just a feature that you would use as part of your interaction with the platform. How well does guided NLQ perform in more semantically challenging environments like health? That is it's a great question because I have a background in, it's actually, I have a graduate degree in bioinformatics. So while I worked with kind of life science data a lot more, a lot of the people around me in the medical center that I got that degree in were doing a lot of work around kind of clinical informatics. And I think there is a ton of business intelligence that needs to be deployed into those environments. But of course, the acquisition processes are very complex. We've done a few deals in healthcare ourselves as our business. And it's always, I think, a very sophisticated environment to deploy a solution into, not only because of the security constraints, but also, it's heavily regulated, lots of compliance, and the vocabulary is, as you point out, quite sophisticated. It takes a while to kind of get up to speed on it. So what I think is great about a feature like this is when you go into the view in the way that we were talking about earlier, you can look at that view and you can constrain just what somebody is initially able to ask questions about. So if you have somebody that wants to ask about different, let's just say we have one client, for example, that does capital asset management for hospitals. And if you want somebody to go in and ask about, how are the assets, looking in terms of the different functional rooms in my hospital, you're talking about a lot of equipment that's very expensive, and maintaining it is very expensive. And if you can analyze that and find a way to ask questions about it that are semantically rich because you've set your view up correctly, but still kind of on a limited vocabulary, as much as you can limit it in a complex field like healthcare, you can still ask some tremendously sophisticated questions out of a tool like this, partly because you are the one who set up that metadata. So an actual domain expert is the one who set up that metadata, rather than Yellowfin publishing you its own solution to the problem. And then you have to go in and kind of search based on what, table column names or something like that are, which I think adds technical complexity as well as domain complexity to the problem. So when you get Yellowfin and you set it up, you go in and say, if you want to have, ICD codes, or you want to have, different functional areas of a hospital, or you want to take a look at, kind of different procedures and their billing implications, or appointments tracked, or anything like that we've often heard in clinics that they need to track and manage, you can set that vocabulary up to your liking and to your audience's clarity in your own way in the view, and then turn around and publish it as a guided NLQ experience. So that customization, I think, is really important for the feature, and is a big part of being able to deploy to very sophisticated semantic domains like healthcare. What are the NLQ applications for improving customer support or customer experience within, say, mobile applications? That's interesting. I haven't actually seen a deployment to support operations. I've seen a ton of work around BI and even data science and customer support applications, one of which was a very interesting it was a data science topic analysis that turned around and got a bunch of keywords to segment different support tickets into different areas of the technology that were having problems. And then they would measure how many support tickets were coming in on those topics, so that if they saw a spike or something like that, they could intervene. And that's more kind of what I've seen just myself in terms of applications there. I would imagine that if sort of post-incident analysis, you wanted to get in and understand how many tickets have we gotten on this subject in the last month, in the last year, has it been growing, has it been declining, and you want to do that in an ad hoc way because you don't have a dashboard that maybe looks at it from the perspective that incident has given you. This is random stuff you're coming up with on a Tuesday afternoon. I think that's where this would fit in, very well for questions like that. To ask a question about access filters, yes, they are respected within NQL. You want to make sure you go into that field restriction menu and make sure that is enabled, so that those restrictions are enabled. but yes, they access filters are respected by NLQ. And as a second question, I saw there, access source filter, do they apply to NLQ reports? And same answer, it's basically something you just want to make sure you go in and set up in the field restrictions. How do you find the UUID of a view? Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell you, one of the ways that I do stuff like that, and I'm not sure if it's the right way, but it's simple, is that if I go into a view and, I want to edit the view, basically, then, well, let me get out of that. I can always get the UUID out of that URL. And that's basically how I do it. Another way is if you look at views in the configuration database, you can also get their UUIDs out of that. Is it possible to use natural language queries in one of the voice assistants like Alexa? That's a very interesting question. I think that we've contemplated setting up like a conference demo where you essentially talk to Yellowfin and through an Alexa, and then it turns around and creates the report to show you. Would be, I think, a cool demo. I don't know of its practical use, but the method we were thinking of to do that is to create an Alexa skill that uses the Yellowfin JavaScript API and then, essentially calls on the Yellowfin JavaScript API in order to render the report on a large screen or something like that for an audience. But again, it was just for demonstration purposes. We hadn't really put it together, and I haven't seen a practical use for it yet. Is it possible to change the standard natural language query phrases to set up our own way to ask those questions? I suspect it is. I think that most of the query definitions are in a JSON file, essentially deployed to Yellowfin. And if you install Yellowfin, one of the things you will put into one of the things it will install in its folder, in its main kind of installation folder, is a development folder, which has a lot of examples of code and things like that for interacting with the API. Highly recommend you look at it if you're looking at doing development against Yellowfin, because it's got lots of examples and you don't have to start with zero on that stuff. One of the files in there is an example of one of those JSON files. Most of the time I've seen that used to extend locality, because you can change the language essentially in the prompts for the questions, or make it so that there are multiple languages available. And so if you add, German, French, Japanese, whatever, you can add those characters in there, so that you can add those phrases in there, so that basically it will show up to the local user's browser language. So I've seen that. If you want to use that to maybe further manipulate it, all I can tell you is I haven't done it myself, and I'm not aware of any published documentation on it. But you're certainly welcome to take that file and play around with it, and I would love to hear about what your experience is. Is there any chance this will be simply exportable or printable? Sure. I mean, if I understand your question, so if you go in and ask a question, kind of like we did here, and we want to just see, I don't know, anything. I mean, there. Once I save this as a report, I can certainly export that report in any way that a report is exportable by Yellowfin. Is NLQ appropriate for customer-facing applications? For example, customers wanting to know future stock for a product. Yes, I mean, I think it is. I think that the key thing is when you do this in JavaScript, for example, you're going to want to go through and kind of add some styling around it. And styling is a little more, I think, limited around NLQ from what I've seen, unfortunately, than it is around some of the other features of Yellowfin. In fact, I recently was helping a client that was kind of trying to do some deeper styling once you get into the actual interface here. And, you know, if you want to change this text to be red or you wanted to do something like that, it's not quite the same experience as if you go through and restyle a dashboard where you can really extensively style, you know, native Yellowfin. So there are some limitations there, but certainly I think that this is very appropriate for customer-facing applications because if you can get it to work within the constraints you have, that you simplify that ability to go and put an interrogation interface in front of your customers. So if they want to ask simple questions, you know, and I keep coming back to these things that I just hear over and over and over again that would be too much work to develop a report against and even generate support requests. Like, you know, how much did we do in sales in Wisconsin last year? If you just want to know that one time, putting together a report for that, you know, it's just, I think it can be done faster and I think it's easier. And I think Yellowfin has found a simpler way to put that together. Once you can publish that to your customers in a way that is aligned with your brand and your application, however that is, I think that piece of it, when you can put that in front of your customers and get them just slightly educated on what the vocabulary, the semantics are around it, then I think that, you know, they can go in now and in an ad hoc manner ask those questions. And I see a lot of engagement opportunity there while minimizing the support on the publishing vendor. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm scrolling through and I think we've answered the lion's share there. Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I hope that you've enjoyed this session. I've certainly enjoyed getting up here and sharing this with you. So I think that if you have any further questions, you know, feel free to contact us and just kind of, or questions didn't get answered or you want to get a little bit deeper into, we're always happy to talk about this stuff. So reach out. And thanks for attending today. Look forward to you next time.